She didn't say hello. She didn't explain. She just said, "Sir, your son is on the street. He can't get up." On the other end of the line, the most feared man in the city went silent because his son was supposed to be home, and suddenly, he wasn't. What he did next would expose a betrayal no one saw coming. If this story pulled you in, go ahead and subscribe so you never miss what's ahead. I've got another unforgettable story coming tomorrow. And while you're here, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing people tuned in from all over the world. Okay, let's get back into it. The snow fell heavier with each block Joanna Sanders walked, her secondhand boots leaving uneven prints on the sidewalk that would be covered within minutes. Her shift at Carmine's had stretched past midnight again, 6 tables, 4 hours overtime, and tips that barely cleared $40, still 20 short of what she needed to keep the lights on another week. She tucked the crumpled bills deeper into her coat pocket, the fabric worn so thin she could feel the wind slice straight through to her skin. The street that ran behind the restaurant was always quiet this time of night, the kind of quiet that made her footsteps sound too loud. But tonight something felt wrong. The usual hum of distant traffic was absent, swallowed by the muffling snow, and the streetlight outside the restaurant's service entrance kept flickering in a rhythm that set her teeth on edge. Joanna pulled her oversized coat tighter, a donation bin find from 2 winters ago that had seen better days even then. Her dark hair, pulled back in a messy ponytail, had come loose during the shift, strands now plastered to her face by melting snow. Her hands, raw and red from 10 hours of washing dishes and carrying scalding plates, ached with every movement. But she didn't stop walking. Stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant calculating, and the numbers never added up no matter how many times she ran them. Rent, 8 days overdue. Her mother's medication, 3 days until she ran out. The electric bill, already stamped with a final notice. And here she was, walking home through a snowstorm with $43 that might buy groceries if she stretched them thin enough. The alley behind Carmine's was her usual shortcut, poorly lit, lined with dumpsters and delivery pallets, but 5 minutes faster than going around the block. She'd walked this route so many times. She knew every crack in the pavement, every piece of graffiti on the brick walls, every place the ice formed in treacherous patches. Her boots knew where to step without her thinking about it, so when her boot connected with something that shouldn't be there, she knew immediately. Joanna stumbled, her hand shooting out to catch herself against the brick wall, the rough surface scraping her palm. She looked down, ready to curse whoever had left trash in the middle of the walkway, and froze. Not trash. A person. Her breath caught in her throat, visible in the freezing air. The figure lay crumpled between a parked car and the wall, half hidden in shadow, dusted with snow that had already begun to accumulate. She saw the shoes' first polished black leather, expensive enough to stand out even in the dark. Then the coat, charcoal gray and perfectly tailored, the kind of thing she'd seen in store windows but never touched, the kind of thing that cost more than 3 months of her rent. For a split second, Joanna thought about walking away. This wasn't her problem. This wasn't her world. People who wore coats like that had people to help them, people who got paid to care. Then she saw the faint rise and fall of breathing. Her nursing school training 2 semesters before the money ran out, kicked in before her common sense could stop her. Joanna dropped to her knees, the cold seeping through her work pants instantly, and carefully turned the figure over. The face that emerged from the shadows made her stomach drop. Andrea Hendricks, 14 years old. Dark hair plastered to his forehead, now matted with melting snow. His private school uniform, the one with the embroidered crest she'd noticed every time he came to the restaurant, was torn at the shoulder, the navy fabric stained dark in places she didn't want to examine too closely. His face was swollen along the left side, a bruise spreading across his cheekbone in shades of purple and black that looked worse in the flickering streetlight. Joanna had served Andrea and his father exactly 7 times at Carmine's. Not that she'd ever told anyone she counted. But she did. She counted everything: good tips, bad tips, the number of times customers actually said thank you. Andrea had always been polite, quiet, the kind of kid who said please when asking for extra bread and actually stacked his plates before she cleared them. His father, Mats Hendricks, was different. Everyone at Carmine's knew who Mats was, even if nobody said it out loud. The way the owner seated him at the corner table without being asked. The way conversations dropped to whispers when he walked in. The way he tipped not loudly, not to show off, but with the kind of precision that made it clear the gesture was intentional, calculated, a message. Joanna had never asked questions, never pried. That wasn't how you survived in her world. But now Andrea was here, barely conscious, bruised, and struggling to breathe in an alley he had no business being in. Andrea? Her voice came out steadier than she felt, cutting through the silence. Can you hear me? His eyes fluttered, cracking open for just a second, unfocused, glassy, struggling to find her face. His lips moved, forming words that wouldn't come, sounds that dissolved into nothing. A thin line of blood had dried beneath his nose, already crusted in the cold. Joanna's hand moved to his neck, checking his pulse. Elevated but steady, she ran her hands carefully over his arms, his ribs, looking for breaks, for bleeding, for anything that screamed immediate danger. His breathing was shallow but consistent. The injuries looked painful, but not immediately life-threatening. This wasn't random. Nobody ended up in this alley by accident, and nobody got beaten this precisely without it meaning something. Andrea, I need you to stay with me, okay? She kept her voice calm, professional, the way her instructors had taught her before everything fell apart. Can you tell me what hurts? He tried again to speak, his throat working, but only managed a weak groan. That's when Joanna's hand found her purse, her fingers already searching for the business card she'd kept tucked in the inner pocket for 3 months. The one Mats Hendricks had pressed into her palm after Andrea's third visit to the restaurant, his dark eyes holding hers for just a moment longer than necessary. In case of emergencies, he'd said. Nothing more. She'd never expected to use it. Her fingers found the heavy cardstock, pulled it free. 2 phone numbers printed in black ink. On the back, a single word written in sharp, precise handwriting. Emergencies. Joanna pulled out her phone with shaking hands, snow already collecting on the screen. She dialed the first number, her other hand resting protectively on Andrea's shoulder. The phone rang once, twice. Then a voice answered deep, distracted, controlled. Yes? Joanna swallowed hard. Mr. Hendricks, she said, forcing her voice to stay level. This is Joanna Sanders, from Carmine's restaurant. A pause. Background noise, voices, movement, then sudden quiet. I'm listening. Your son is on the street, she said, each word deliberate. He can't get up. The silence that followed lasted 3 heartbeats. That's impossible, Mats replied, his tone shifting. Andrea should be home. Sir, Joanna said again, firmer now, looking down at Andrea's bruised face. I'm with him right now. He's hurt. She heard it then, the scrape of a chair. Footsteps. A door opening. Where? The single word carried weight like a blade. The alley behind Carmine's, near the brick wall by the service entrance. Do not leave him. The line went dead. Joanna lowered the phone, her hand trembling now that the adrenaline was catching up. She looked down at Andrea, still struggling to keep his eyes open, and did the only thing she could. She stayed. 10 minutes felt like an hour. Joanna knelt in the snow beside Andrea, her knees numb, her jeans soaked through to the skin. She'd pulled off her coat, thin as it was, and draped it over his chest, trying to preserve what little body heat he had left. The cold bit into her arms through her work shirt, but she didn't move. Couldn't move. She'd made a promise to a man she barely knew, and somehow that promise felt more binding than any contract she'd ever signed. Stay with me, Andrea, she whispered, checking his pulse again. Still steady, still there. Your dad's coming. Just hold on. Andrea's eyes cracked open, unfocused and distant. His lips moved, and this time sound came out weak, slurred, barely audible over the wind. Didn't. See them. Don't try to talk, Joanna said quickly, her hand on his shoulder. Save your energy. But he kept trying, his breathing growing more labored with the effort. Said, tell him. Andrea, please. Just rest. His hand moved, fingers grasping weakly at her sleeve, and she saw something in his eyes that made her chest tighten. Not pain, not confusion, fear. Whatever had happened here wasn't random, and Andrea knew it. Joanna heard them before she saw them. The low rumble of engines, multiple vehicles moving fast, headlights cut through the falling snow, 3 black SUVs turning into the alley with precision that suggested they'd done this before. They stopped in formation, blocking both exits, engines still running. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the door of the middle vehicle opened, and Mats Hendricks stepped out. Joanna had seen him before, of course. 7 times, always at the corner table, always in a suit that probably cost more than her yearly salary. But she'd never seen him like this. In the restaurant, he was controlled, measured, A man who spoke in low tones and made decisions with the subtlety of a chess player. This was different. He moved with absolute certainty, his black overcoat billowing behind him as he crossed the distance between them in long strides. His dark hair was slicked back perfectly despite the weather, his jaw set in a hard line. The tattoos that crept up from his collar, serpents and symbols she'd glimpsed but never stared at, seemed darker against his skin in the harsh glare of the headlights. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Dark, intense, burning with something that looked like fury wrapped in ice. Men poured out of the other vehicles, 4, maybe 5, all dressed in dark clothes, all moving with military efficiency. One immediately began scanning the area. Another spoke urgently into a phone. A third approached with what looked like a medical kit. Mats dropped to one knee beside his son, and for just a moment, something cracked in that controlled facade. "Andrea." His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more weight than any shout. His hands adorned with heavy rings that caught the light moved over Andrea's face, his shoulders, checking for damage with surprising gentleness. "Look at me, boy." Andrea's eyes found his father, and relief flooded his features. "Dad, I'm here." Mats's jaw clenched. "Who did this?" Andrea tried to speak, but his words came out jumbled, incoherent. Mats's expression hardened with each failed attempt, and Joanna watched as he made a decision in real time. "Get him to the car," Mats ordered, not looking away from Andrea. "Carefully." 2 men moved immediately, lifting Andrea with practiced precision. Joanna started to stand, to move out of the way, when Mats's hand caught her wrist. Not hard, not threatening, but absolute. "You called me," he said, those dark eyes finally meeting hers. Up close, she could see the flecks of amber in them, the faint scar above his left eyebrow. "You stayed with him." It wasn't a question, but Joanna nodded anyway. She swallowed, suddenly aware of how surreal this moment was. "I couldn't just leave him." Something shifted in Mats's expression, not quite gratitude, but close. Recognition, maybe. Acknowledgement. "You're coming with us," he said, releasing her wrist. "What?" "No, that wasn't a request." But his tone wasn't harsh. If anything, it was almost apologetic. "I need to know everything you saw, everything he said, and you're freezing." Joanna looked down at herself, soaked jeans, thin work shirt, no coat. She was shaking, she realized, had been for the last few minutes without noticing. One of Mats's men appeared beside her, holding out her coat. She took it numbly, pulling it on with fingers that barely worked. "The hospital?" she asked. "Yes." Mats stood, towering over her, and gestured toward the middle SUV. "After you." The interior of the vehicle was warm, leather seats soft beneath her as she slid in. Andrea had been laid across the back row, a blanket already tucked around him, one of the men monitoring his vitals with efficient calm. Mats climbed in beside Joanna, and the door shut with a heavy finality. The convoy began moving before she could process what was happening. Joanna sat rigidly, acutely aware of the armed men in the front seats, the unconscious boy behind her, the dangerous man sitting close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, evenly. "You work at Carmine's," Matt said, breaking the silence. Not a question, a statement. "Yes, sir." "How long?" 2 years. He nodded, his gaze fixed on Andrea in the rearview mirror. "You remember my son?" "Andrea?" "Yes." Joanna hesitated. "He's always been polite." "He mentioned you once," Matt said quietly. "Said you were kind to him, that you brought him extra dessert without being asked." Joanna blinked. She had done that once, when Andrea had looked particularly tired after what seemed like a difficult conversation at the table. She hadn't thought anyone noticed. "It was just tiramisu," she said softly. "Nothing is just anything." Mats's attention shifted to her fully, and the weight of his gaze was almost physical. "Tell me what you saw." "Everything." So she did. She described finding Andrea, the state he was in, the few words he'd tried to speak. She left nothing out, keeping her voice steady even as her hands trembled in her lap. Mats listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable, but she saw his knuckles whiten where he gripped the armrest. "He said something about not seeing them," she finished, "and something about telling you, but I couldn't make out the rest." Mats was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out his phone, pressing a single contact. "Secure the perimeter around Street Catherine's," he said when someone answered. "Full detail. I'm 10 minutes out." He ended the call and looked at Andrea again. "He was supposed to be home," Matt said, more to himself than to her. The driver dropped him at the door. "I watched him go inside." Joanna saw it then, the fracture in his control. Not panic, not quite, but something close to it. Fear dressed up as calculation. "He's strong," she offered, not knowing what else to say. "His pulse is steady. Whatever happened, he's fighting." Matt's eyes met hers again, and for just a second, she saw past the reputation, past the power, past everything people whispered about in dark corners of Carmine's. She saw a father. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for calling, for staying. Anyone would have." "No," Matz interrupted, firm but not unkind. "They wouldn't have. Trust me on that." The hospital came into view, its emergency entrance already surrounded by more black vehicles. Joanna realized, as they pulled up, that this night was far from over, and that she'd just stepped into a world she'd spent 2 years carefully avoiding. The emergency entrance doors slid open before they reached them. Joanna barely had time to register the orchestrated chaos, men in dark suits flanking the entrance, a hospital administrator already waiting with a clipboard, nurses moving with practiced urgency as Andrea was transferred to a gurney. The entire operation felt rehearsed, as if St. Catherine's Hospital had been expecting this call for years. Maybe they had been. "Private room, 3rd floor," the administrator said to Matz, not bothering with pleasantries. "Dr. Reyes is already scrubbed in." Matz nodded once, his hand remaining on Andrea's shoulder as they moved through the corridor. Joanna followed because no one told her not to, because Matz's driver had gestured for her to stay close, because she genuinely didn't know what else to do. Her wet jeans left a trail of melted snow on the polished floor. They bypassed the waiting room entirely, took a private elevator that required a key card, and emerged into a quiet wing that looked nothing like any emergency room Joanna had ever seen, more like a hotel. Soft lighting, artwork on the walls, the kind of place where money bought privacy and privacy bought silence. Andrea was wheeled into a room at the end of the hall, and suddenly there were doctors, nurses, monitors beeping to life. Joanna caught a glimpse of Andrea's face, still pale, still unconscious before the door closed, and she found herself standing in the hallway beside 3 of Matz's men. None of them spoke. None of them even looked at her. They simply stood there, statues in expensive suits, eyes scanning the corridor with the kind of vigilance that suggested they expected trouble. Matz emerged 10 minutes later, his overcoat gone, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. The tattoos on his forearms were fully visible now, intricate designs that wound from wrist to elbow, serpents and geometric patterns that seemed to shift in the fluorescent light. He looked at Joanna as if remembering she existed. "Come with me," he said. He led her to a small consultation room, leather chairs, a mahogany table, walls thick enough to muffle sound. One of his men brought coffee in real ceramic mugs, not styrofoam cups. Joanna wrapped her hands around the warmth, grateful despite herself. Matt sat across from her, silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the exhaustion of a man who'd been running on pure will for the last hour. "The doctors say he'll be fine," Matt said. "Concussion, bruised ribs, facial trauma, but nothing that won't heal." "That's good," Joanna said quietly. "That's really good. They're keeping him sedated for now, letting his body rest." Matt's jaw tightened. "But when he wakes up, I need to know who did this." Joanna nodded, unsure what response he wanted. "You said he tried to speak," Matz continued, his eyes fixed on her with uncomfortable intensity. "In the alley. What exactly did he say?" "He said he didn't see them," Joanna repeated, searching her memory. "And something about telling you, but that was all I could make out. The rest was too slurred." Matz's fingers drummed once against the table, the only outward sign of agitation. "Didn't see them," meaning they came from behind. It wasn't a question, but Joanna answered anyway. "I think so. And the location." Matz leaned back, his mind clearly working through scenarios. "Behind Carmine's, in the alley. That's not random, that's deliberate." Joanna felt cold despite the coffee. "You think someone was waiting for him? I think someone knew his route." Matz's voice dropped lower. "I think someone knew exactly where to find him." The implication hung in the air like smoke. "But why?" Joanna asked, then immediately regretted speaking. This wasn't her business. This wasn't her world. But Matz didn't seem offended. If anything, he looked almost appreciative of the question. That, he said slowly, is what I intend to find out. A knock at the door interrupted them. One of Mats's men stepped in, spoke in rapid Italian, too quiet for Joanna to catch. Mats's expression darkened, and he stood abruptly. Stay here, he told Joanna. Please. He left before she could respond. Joanna sat alone in the consultation room, the coffee cooling in her hands, reality slowly catching up with adrenaline. What was she doing here? She should be home. She should be sleeping. She had another shift at Carmine's tomorrow today, technically, in less than 8 hours. Her landlord was still waiting for rent. Her mother still needed medication. But instead, she was sitting in a private hospital wing, surrounded by armed men, waiting for a Mafia boss to come back. And, what? Thank her? Question her further? Make sure she understood the weight of silence? The door opened again 20 minutes later. Mats returned, and this time his expression had shifted into something harder. More resolved. Andrea's awake, he said. Briefly. He wants to see you. Me? Joanna stood so quickly she nearly spilled the coffee. Why would he? He asked for the woman who found him. Mats's tone was unreadable. Come. Andrea's room was dim. Most of the lights turned low to ease the concussion. He lay propped against pillows, his face swollen worse than it had looked in the alley, one eye nearly shut, an IV line running into his arm, but his good eye found Joanna immediately when she entered, and something like relief crossed his features. You stayed, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Joanna moved closer, hyper-aware of Matt standing behind her like a dark shadow. Of course I stayed. Thank you. Andrea's hand moved weakly on the blanket. I tried to get up. Couldn't. Don't worry about that now, Joanna said gently. You're safe. That's what matters. But Andrea's eye shifted to his father, and the fear Joanna had seen in the alley returned. Dad, Andrea said, struggling to push himself up. A nurse moved to stop him, but Mats waved her off. Dad, they said. Easy, Matt said, his voice softer than Joanna had heard it. He moved to his son's bedside, his hand resting on Andrea's shoulder. Take your time. Andrea swallowed hard, wincing. They said it was for you. They wanted you to know they could reach me. The room went absolutely still. Joanna felt the temperature drop, or maybe that was just her imagination. But the way Mats's spine straightened, the way his fingers tensed against Andrea's shoulder, the way every man in the room shifted their weight almost imperceptibly, it all screamed danger. Who? Mats asked, his voice deadly calm. I don't know. Andrea's good eye filled with tears. He tried to blink away. 3 of them. Masks. They grabbed me by the car. Before I got inside, I fought, but how many hits? I don't. Maybe 10? They weren't trying to kill me. Andrea's voice cracked. They kept saying your name, kept saying you'd understand the message. Matt stood perfectly motionless, and Joanna realized she was witnessing something dangerous, not anger. Anger was hot, explosive, visible. This was something else entirely. This was calculation wrapped in fury, waiting for the right moment to strike. What else? Mats asked softly. One of them. Andrea hesitated. One of them had a tattoo. On his wrist. I saw it when he grabbed me. It looked like one of yours. The snake. The silence that followed felt like a blade hanging in the air. Mats leaned down, kissed Andrea's forehead, a gesture so tender it seemed to belong to a different person, and straightened. Get some rest, he said. I'll be right outside. He turned and walked out of the room, and every man in the corridor immediately fell into step behind him. Joanna stood frozen beside Andrea's bed, the nurse quietly checking monitors, and realized with absolute certainty that she'd just witnessed the moment a war began. Joanna stayed with Andrea for another hour, mostly because leaving felt wrong, and staying felt only slightly less terrifying than whatever was happening in the hallway beyond the closed door. The nurse, a middle-aged woman named Rita, who moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to high-profile patients, checked Andrea's vitals every 15 minutes, and said nothing about the armed men stationed outside. She simply did her job, adjusted his IV, and left Joanna alone with a 14-year-old boy who kept drifting in and out of consciousness. Each time Andrea woke, his good eye found her immediately, as if confirming she was still real. You don't have to stay, he whispered during one of these moments. I know, Joanna said, adjusting the blanket that had slipped from his shoulder. But I'm not leaving until your dad comes back. He's going to hurt someone. It wasn't a question. Andrea's voice carried a strange mixture of certainty and resignation, like he'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. Joanna didn't know how to respond to that, so she settled for honesty. Probably. They shouldn't have touched me. Andrea's eye closed again. Everyone knows the rules. You don't touch family. The casual way he said it, like discussing weather patterns or traffic routes, sent a chill through Joanna's chest. This was his normal. Violence as etiquette. Retaliation as protocol. Before she could dwell on it further, the door opened, and Mats entered, followed by two men she hadn't seen before. One carried a laptop, the other held a tablet, and what looked like an evidence folder. Mats's expression hadn't changed, still that carefully controlled mask, but something in his posture suggested decisions had been made. "How is he?" Mats asked Rita. "Stable, resting comfortably. The swelling should decrease by morning." Rita made a note on her chart. "I've administered pain medication. He'll sleep through the night." Mats nodded, then turned to Joanna. "Come with me, please." The please felt important somehow, a reminder that she wasn't a prisoner, even if she wasn't quite free to leave either. She followed him to the same consultation room, where the laptop was already being set up on the mahogany table. One of the men, younger, maybe 30, with wire-rimmed glasses that seemed out of place on someone carrying a gun, pulled up what appeared to be security footage. "We pulled the CCTV from every camera within 3 blocks of the restaurant," he explained, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "Street cameras, traffic lights, private businesses. Took some convincing, but we got them all." "Show her," Matt said, gesturing to Joanna. "I want her to see what you found." The man pulled up footage time-stamped 11:47 p.m., just over 2 hours ago, though it felt like days. The angle showed the alley from above, grainy but clear enough. Joanna watched herself walk into frame, saw the moment she stumbled, saw herself kneel beside Andrea's body. "That's you finding him at 11:51, the man said, fast-forwarding slightly. "Now watch this." He switched to a different camera, this one showing the street adjacent to the alley. A black sedan pulled up at 11:32 p.m. 3 figures emerged, all wearing dark clothing, faces obscured by masks. They moved with purpose, checking the street before disappearing into the alley. The timestamp showed 11:34 p.m. when they reappeared, moving quickly back to the sedan. No running, no panic, just efficient extraction. 17 minutes from arrival to departure, the man said. They knew exactly where to go, exactly when he'd be there. Mats leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the screen. "Go back, the moment they exit the vehicle." The footage reversed, played again in slow motion. Joanna watched the 3 figures emerge, and this time she noticed details she'd missed before. The way they moved synchronized, practiced. The way one of them checked his watch. The way another gestured with his hand, directing the others. "There," Matt said sharply. "Freeze it." The image froze on the second figure, his arm extended as he pointed toward the alley. His sleeve had ridden up slightly, exposing his wrist. Even in the grainy footage, even with the poor lighting, Joanna could see it. A tattoo, dark lines coiling around his wrist like a serpent. "Zoom in," Mats ordered. The image enlarged, pixels breaking apart slightly but still visible enough. The snake design was unmistakable. Geometric, precise, identical to the patterns Joanna had seen on Mats's own forearms. "That's one of ours," the man with the laptop said quietly. "That specific design, only 15 people in the organization have it. It's a mark of trust." Inner circle. The room went silent. Joanna looked at Mats, saw his jaw clench, saw the muscle in his temple pulse once, twice. But his voice when he spoke remained perfectly level. "Pull the personnel files. Everyone with that mark. I want locations, alibis, phone records from the last 48 hours. "Already started," the second man said, tapping his tablet. 3 of them were out of the country. 4 have solid alibis. That leaves 8 possibles. "Narrow it down," Matt said. "Someone in this room betrayed me. Someone I trusted enough to mark." Joanna felt like she shouldn't be hearing this. Like she'd walked into a confessional and couldn't leave without hearing sins she wasn't meant to absolve. "Sir," she said quietly, "maybe I should." "No." Mats looked at her, and something in his expression made her close her mouth. "You found my son. You called me. You stayed with him when you could have walked away. You're part of this now, whether either of us likes it, but I don't know anything about." You know Andrea was beaten by professionals who made sure to leave him alive? Mats interrupted. You know they did it in an alley behind a restaurant I frequent. You know they left him exactly where someone might find him, but not too quickly. He stood, moving to the window that overlooked the city. This wasn't random violence. This was a message, and whoever sent it wanted to make sure I understood. Understood what? Joanna asked. That they can reach my son whenever they want. Mats's reflection in the window was dark, distorted. That my protection means nothing. That I'm vulnerable. The man with the laptop cleared his throat. Sir, there's something else. Mats turned. The attack was clean. Too clean. No broken bones, no internal bleeding, no permanent damage. These weren't street thugs. Whoever did this had training. Medical training, maybe. They knew exactly how much force to use. To hurt without killing, Mats said softly. To send a message without starting a war, the man corrected. If Andrea had died, you'd have no choice but full retaliation. But this leaves you in a gray area. Do you respond? Do you wait? Do you investigate first? Mats was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to face both men fully, and Joanna saw the decision crystallize in his eyes. I investigate first, he said, quietly, thoroughly. And when I find who ordered this, not just who carried it out, but who gave the command, I make sure it never happens again. The two men nodded and left. Joanna found herself alone with Mats once more, the weight of secrets she didn't want pressing against her chest. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. What if it wasn't someone trying to start a war? What if it was someone trying to end one? Mats looked at her sharply, and Joanna saw real curiosity flash across his features. Explain. You said they knew where to find Andrea. They knew his route. They knew exactly how to hurt him without killing him. Joanna chose her words carefully. What if someone inside wanted you to think you were under attack? So you'd react. So you'd retaliate against the wrong people. Matt stared at her for 3 full seconds. Then, slowly, he smiled. It wasn't a warm smile, but it was genuine. You're smarter than you pretend to be, he said. I work in a restaurant that caters to men like you, Joanna replied. You learn to see patterns. Then you've just become more valuable than you realize. Mats moved toward the door. Get some rest. One of my men will take you home. Tomorrow we find the traitor. Joanna didn't go home. She told herself it was because Mats's driver was waiting, because refusing seemed more dangerous than accepting, because she was too exhausted to argue. But the truth was simpler and more uncomfortable. She wanted to know how this ended. The driver, a quiet man named Ivan, who spoke exactly 3 words during the entire ride, took her to an apartment building she'd never noticed before, tucked between a laundromat and a closed bookstore. He handed her a key card and a phone number written on plain paper. 3rd floor, Unit 7, he said. Anything you need, call that number. Don't leave until someone comes for you. Then he was gone, and Joanna stood in the lobby of a building that smelled like expensive cleaning products and old money, holding a key to an apartment she hadn't asked for. The unit was small but immaculate hardwood floors, leather furniture, a kitchen that looked like it had never been used. Someone had left clothes on the bed in her size, jeans, shirts, a heavy coat that would actually keep out the cold. On the nightstand sat a stack of cash that made her monthly rent look like pocket change. Joanna sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process the last 6 hours. She'd found a boy in an alley, made a phone call, saved someone's son, and now she was in a safe house with more money than she'd seen in years, waiting for permission to return to her own life. The phone on the nightstand rang at 6:47 a.m. She answered without thinking. Hello? It's Mats. His voice sounded different over the phone, less controlled, more tired. Did you sleep? No. Neither did I. A pause. I need to handle something this morning. Stay where you are. Ivan will bring you lunch. Mr. Hendricks. Mats, he interrupted. If you're going to be part of this, use my name. Mats, she corrected, the name strange in her mouth. I have work today. My shift starts at 11. I called the restaurant, told them you're sick. You're covered for the next 3 days. Joanna felt anger flare in her chest. You can't just... I can, he said, not unkindly. And I did. Because right now, until I know who did this and why, anyone associated with my family is a potential target. That includes you. The line went dead. Joanna stared at the phone, then at the money on the nightstand, then at the clothes that fit her perfectly. She'd been absorbed into Mats Hendricks' world without her permission, and the worst part was understanding exactly why. She'd seen too much, knew too much, and in Mats's world, that meant protection whether she wanted it or not. Ivan brought lunch at noon, real food from a restaurant she recognized but could never afford. He also brought a laptop and a brief explanation. Mats wanted her to watch something. The screen showed surveillance footage from earlier that morning. A warehouse district, dawn light cutting through industrial buildings. 2 black SUVs pulling up outside a structure with no visible signage. Mats emerged from the first vehicle, flanked by 4 men. The footage had no audio, but Joanna could read his body language: controlled, purposeful, dangerous. He entered the warehouse. The timestamp showed 23 minutes before he emerged again. His expression unchanged, but his knuckles slightly red. The second video started automatically. This one showed an office, expensive, modern, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A man sat behind a mahogany desk, older than Mats, gray at the temples, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Joanna's car had when it still ran. Mats entered the frame, sat across from him without being invited. The laptop had audio this time. "Unexpected visit," the older man was saying, his accent thick with something European. "Maybe Russian. To what do I owe the pleasure, Hendricks? Your people put their hands on my son last night." Mats's voice was conversational, almost friendly, which somehow made it more terrifying. The older man's expression didn't change. "I heard about the incident. Unfortunate. But I can assure you, I had nothing to do with it." "Konstantin," Mats said, leaning back in his chair. "I've known you 15 years. We've done business. We've split territories. We've maintained peace because peace is profitable." He paused. "So when I tell you 3 men with organization tattoos beat my 14-year-old son in an alley and left him to freeze, I expect you to understand why I'm asking questions." "I understand completely." Konstantin's hands folded calmly on his desk. "Which is why I'm telling you with absolute certainty I gave no such order. Hurting Andrea benefits me in no way. It violates every agreement we have. It would be, forgive me, stupid." Joanna watched Mats study the man across from him, looking for tells, for cracks, for any sign of deception. "You're saying you had nothing to do with it," Mats said slowly. "I'm saying exactly that. But someone with access to my organization's marks did." "Then you have a problem that isn't me." Konstantin leaned forward. "Mats, I have grandchildren. I have businesses that run smoothly because men like you and I maintain order. Why would I destabilize that? For what purpose?" The silence stretched between them. "If I find out you're lying," Mats said quietly, "there will be no more conversations. If you find out I'm lying, I will deserve whatever comes." Konstantin's expression remained steady. "But you won't, because I'm not." Mats stood, buttoned his coat, and left without another word. The footage ended. Joanna sat back, her lunch forgotten. She'd just watched a conversation between 2 dangerous men, both speaking a language of threat and diplomacy so refined it felt like watching ballet performed with knives. And the terrifying part? She believed Konstantin. Which meant Mats had just confirmed what she'd suggested last night. This wasn't an outside attack. Someone inside his organization wanted him to think it was. The phone rang again at 2:15 p.m. "You watched it?" Mats asked without preamble. "Yes." "Your thoughts?" Joanna hesitated. "He's telling the truth. I agree." Mats sounded almost satisfied that she'd reached the same conclusion. "Which means the next conversation will be significantly more difficult." "With who?" "My own people." A pause. "Joanna, I need you to understand something. What happens next, what I do to find who betrayed me, it won't be pleasant. If you want out, now is the time to say so. I'll make sure you're protected, make sure you're compensated, and you'll never hear from me again." Joanna looked around the apartment at the money, the clothes, the safety that felt more like a cage with every passing hour. "And if I don't want out? Then you keep watching, keep listening, and you tell me when something doesn't make sense." Mats's voice dropped lower. "You saw what others missed last night, Joanna. You understood the strategy before my own men did. That's rare. That's valuable. I'm a waitress. You're a survivor who pays attention," he corrected. "In my world, that's worth more than muscle." Joanna closed her eyes, thought about her mother's medication, her overdue rent, the tips that never stretched far enough. Thought about Andrea's bruised face and the fear in his eyes. Thought about men who hurt children to send messages. "I'm in," she said, "but I have conditions." She heard the smile in Mats's voice. "I'm listening. My mother. She needs medication, ongoing care. That gets handled, no matter what happens to me." Done. And when this is over, when you find who did this, I go back to my life. No strings, no obligations. Agreed. Matt's paused. Anything else? Yeah. Stop making decisions for me. If you need me to stay somewhere, ask. If you need me to do something, explain why. I'm helping you, not working for you. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Fair enough. Matt said finally. Ivan will bring you to the restaurant tonight. We're having a meeting. Everyone with the serpent mark. Someone in that room ordered the attack on my son. And then? Then we find out who's been playing games with my family. The line went dead. Joanna sat in the quiet apartment, watching snow fall past the window, and wondered at what point she'd stopped being afraid and started being angry. Somewhere between finding Andrea in that alley and watching Matt's interrogate allies, something had shifted. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was invested. The private dining room at Carmine's looked different after hours. Without customers, without the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers, without the carefully maintained atmosphere of elegant discretion, it felt exactly like what it was. A stage where powerful men performed the theater of civility while conducting business that would never see daylight. Joanna sat in the corner booth, the one usually reserved for couples celebrating anniversaries, and watched as Matt's inner circle arrived one by one. Ivan had brought her through the kitchen entrance at 9 p.m., after the last customer had left, and the staff had been sent home early with full pay and no explanations. The owner, a nervous man named Giuseppe who Joanna had rarely seen leave his office, had personally locked the front door and disappeared into the night without meeting anyone's eyes. Now 8 men sat around the main table, and the tension in the room felt thick enough to cut. Joanna recognized 3 of them from the hospital, the man with the laptop, the one with the tablet, and a third who'd stood guard outside Andrea's room. The others were strangers, but they all shared certain characteristics: expensive suits, careful postures, eyes that never stopped assessing threats. And every single one of them had tattoos visible at their wrists or necks, serpents coiled in that distinctive geometric pattern. Matt stood at the head of the table, his coat draped over a chair, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked like a professor about to deliver a lecture, except professors didn't have audiences who carried guns and had probably killed people. "Thank you for coming," Matt began, his voice carrying easily through the quiet room. "I know some of you had to travel. I know some of you had other commitments, but what we discussed tonight cannot wait." He pressed a button on a remote, and the large screen mounted on the far wall came to life, showing the surveillance footage from the alley, the 3 masked figures, the timestamp, the 17-minute window. "2 nights ago my son was attacked," Matt continued, "beaten by 3 professionals who knew his route, knew his timing, and knew exactly how much damage to inflict without killing him." The men at the table watched in silence. Joanna studied their faces, looking for reactions: shock, anger, guilt, anything that might reveal knowledge they shouldn't have. Most showed appropriate outrage. One man's jaw clenched, another's hands curled into fists. But one sitting third from the left, younger than the others, maybe 35 with sharp features and a scar above his eyebrow, showed nothing at all. His face remained perfectly neutral, almost bored, as if he were watching footage of traffic cameras instead of an assault on his boss's son. Matt switched to the zoomed image of the tattoo. "This mark," he said, his finger tracing the serpent on the screen, "is not common. It's not something you buy in a shop or copy from the internet. It's given to people I trust, people who have earned their place in this organization." He paused, letting the implication settle, which means someone in this room either participated in the attack, ordered it, or knows who did. The silence that followed felt radioactive. "Matt's," one of the older men said carefully, "you can't seriously think. I don't think anything yet." Matt's interrupted, his tone still conversational. "I'm simply stating facts. The tattoo doesn't lie. The footage doesn't lie. Someone with access to our inner circle hurt my son." He clicked to the next slide, a spreadsheet with names, locations, and timestamps. "I've reviewed everyone's movements that night. 3 of you were out of the country, confirmed by customs and multiple witnesses. 4 of you have alibis that check out security footage, phone records, credit card transactions." His eyes moved across the faces at the table. "That leaves 8 possible suspects. You're all here tonight because you cannot account for your whereabouts between 11:15 and midnight, or because your alibis require verification I haven't completed yet." The man with the scar leaned back in his chair. "So we're suspects now? After everything we've done for this organization?" "You're suspects," Matt said evenly, "because the evidence points to someone in this room. If that offends you, I apologize. But I will not apologize for protecting my family. We're all family, another man said, his accent thick with something Slavic. We bleed for you. We kill for you. And now you question our loyalty? I question everyone's loyalty when my son is left bleeding in an alley. Mats's voice dropped to something colder. And I will continue questioning until I find the truth. He clicked to another image, the warehouse he'd visited that morning. I met with Constantine Caruso today. Some of you know him. Some of you do business with him. Mats's eyes scanned the room. I asked him directly if he ordered the attack. He denied it, and I believe him. The man with the scar shifted slightly. You trust Caruso's word over ours? I trust evidence, Mats corrected. And the evidence suggests this wasn't an external attack meant to start a war. It was an internal manipulation meant to make me think it was. Joanna watched the realization dawn on several faces, the understanding that they weren't just being questioned about participation, but about conspiracy. Someone in this organization, Mats continued, wanted me to retaliate against Caruso, wanted me to start a conflict that would benefit them somehow, and they were willing to use my son to do it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. So here's what's going to happen, Matt said, his voice taking on a quality that made Joanna's skin prickle. Each of you will provide detailed accounts of your movements that night. Phone records, GPS data, witness statements, everything. You will submit to questioning, and you will cooperate fully. And if we refuse? The scarred man asked. Mats looked at him directly. Then I'll assume you have something to hide. The scarred man held his gaze for 3 seconds, then looked away. Mats gestured to the laptop operator. Carlo will coordinate the interviews. They start tonight. No one leaves until we have answers. As the men began murmuring among themselves, Joanna noticed something. The man with the scar, the one who'd shown no reaction to the footage, was looking at his phone under the table. His thumb moved quickly, typing something, before he slipped it back into his pocket. She caught Mats's eye across the room and tilted her head slightly toward the scarred man. Mats gave no indication he'd seen her signal. But 30 seconds later, he said, "Before we begin, everyone will surrender their phones. This room is secure, but I won't risk information leaving it prematurely." Several men immediately complied, placing their phones on the table. The scarred man hesitated for just a fraction of a second, barely noticeable, but Joanna saw it before adding his to the pile. "Franco," Matt said casually, "you'll go first. Conference room, now." Franco, the scarred man, stood slowly, his expression carefully neutral. Of course. As he passed Joanna's booth, she saw his jaw clench once, quickly, before he disappeared through the door with 2 of Mats's men flanking him. The moment he was gone, Mats picked up Franco's phone from the table. He entered a code clearly already knowing the password, and his expression darkened as he read whatever was on the screen. He looked at Carlo. "Pull Franco's financials. Last 6 months. Every transaction, every deposit, every withdrawal." "On it," Carlo said, fingers already flying over his laptop. Mats turned to the remaining men. "The rest of you wait here. This won't take long." He crossed the room to Joanna's booth, sat down across from her, and showed her the phone screen. The message Franco had been typing read, "They're asking questions. Might need to accelerate timeline." It had been addressed to a contact saved only as K, not Constantine, Joanna said quietly. "No," Mats agreed. "Someone else. Someone Franco answers to. He's not the one who ordered it." "No, he's just the one who carried it out." Mats's smile was cold and surgical. "But he's going to tell me who did." From the conference room, raised voices suddenly erupted Franco's protests, the calm responses of Mats's men, then a crash as something hit the floor. Mats didn't flinch. He simply stood, buttoned his coat, and said, "Wait here. This part you don't need to see." He walked toward the conference room, and Joanna sat alone in the dining room with 7 dangerous men who were now staring at the closed door with expressions ranging from concern to calculation. She'd helped identify a traitor, and somehow, that made everything more dangerous, not less. Joanna didn't see Franco leave the restaurant. She heard the service door open and close 30 minutes after Mats disappeared into the conference room. Heard the sound of a vehicle starting. Heard tires on wet pavement pulling away into the night. And then nothing but the quiet murmur of the 7 remaining men at the table, none of whom looked particularly surprised. When Mats returned, his sleeves were still rolled up, his hands were clean, and his expression was unreadable. He didn't sit down, didn't address the room. He simply looked at Carlo and said, Send everyone home. We'll reconvene tomorrow." The men filed out without questions, without protests. Their phones returned to them at the door. Within 5 minutes, the dining room was empty except for Mats, Joanna, and Ivan standing sentinel by the kitchen entrance. Mats poured himself a glass of whiskey from the bar, expensive, amber, the kind Joanna had served to men who didn't look at price tags. He didn't offer her one. He just sat down across from her in the booth and drank in silence. "Is he dead?" Joanna asked quietly. "No." Mats set the glass down carefully. "But he wishes he was." Joanna's stomach turned. She'd known this was coming, had understood from the moment Franco was identified that whatever happened next wouldn't be gentle. But hearing it confirmed made it real. In a way, surveillance footage and theoretical discussions hadn't. "Did he tell you who ordered it?" "He told me everything." Mats's eyes were dark, tired, carrying weight that hadn't been there 2 days ago. "Franco was recruited 6 months ago. Not by Caruso. Not by any of our rivals. By someone inside the organization who promised him a bigger role, more territory, more money." "Who?" "A man named Paolo Ricci, my logistics coordinator. The person who manages supply routes, payment structures, territory divisions." Mats's jaw tightened. "The person who would benefit most from me starting a war with Caruso." Joanna processed this. "Because during a war, logistics become critical." "Exactly. Paolo would become indispensable, would gain leverage, could renegotiate his position while I was distracted fighting external enemies." Mats finished his whiskey. "He used Franco and 2 others to attack Andrea, knowing I'd see the tattoo, knowing I'd suspect Caruso, knowing I'd retaliate. Except you didn't." "Except I didn't." Mats looked at her directly. "Because you asked the right question at the right moment. You saw the pattern when everyone else saw an attack." Joanna felt the weight of that statement settle on her shoulders. "What happens to Paolo?" "He's already been dealt with." Mats's tone suggested the conversation on that particular topic was closed. "He won't be a problem anymore." The casual finality of it made Joanna's chest tighten. 2 men, maybe 3, had simply ceased to exist in Mats Hendrix's world because they'd made the mistake of thinking they could manipulate him through his son. "You're wondering if you made the right choice," Mats said, reading her expression. "Wondering if helping me means you're responsible for what happened to them." "Am I?" "No." His answer was immediate, certain. "Franco beat my son. Paolo ordered it. They made their choices knowing the consequences. You simply helped me find the truth faster. Prevented more bloodshed, actually. If I'd gone after Caruso first, dozens would have died." Joanna wanted to believe that. Wanted to see her role as preventing violence rather than enabling it. But the distinction felt thin, fragile, like tissue paper pretending to be armor. "How's Andrea?" she asked, changing the subject because she couldn't hold the weight of the other one anymore. Mats's expression softened fractionally. "Better. Awake most of today. Asking questions. Asking about you, actually." "Me?" "He wants to thank you properly. Says he was conscious enough in the alley to know you stayed even when you could have left." Matt stood, retrieved his coat from the chair. "He remembers you from the restaurant. Says you were always kind to him. That means something." Joanna thought about the quiet boy who stacked his plates, who said please and thank you, who existed in this violent world but somehow hadn't been corrupted by it yet. She hoped he never would be. "I'd like to see him," she said, "if that's allowed. Tomorrow. I'll have Ivan bring you to the hospital." Mats paused at the booth. "But first, I need to show you something. In my office." Joanna followed him through the kitchen past the industrial stoves and prep stations, where she'd worked hundreds of shifts, and up a narrow staircase she'd never been allowed to climb. The second floor consisted of a single room, Mats's private office. It was smaller than she'd expected. Functional. A desk, filing cabinets, a wall of security monitors showing various angles of the restaurant and surrounding streets. No artwork. No personal photographs. Nothing that revealed the man who worked here. Mats unlocked a drawer and pulled out a folder, setting it on the desk between them. "Your mother?" he said. "Catherine Sanders. Stage 4 ovarian cancer. Currently being treated at County General. Medication costs running approximately $4,000 a month that insurance doesn't cover." Joanna's breath stopped. "How do you—" "I make it my business to know things." Mats opened the folder, showing medical records, billing statements, pharmacy receipts. "You've been using your tips to buy her medication, going without meals yourself sometimes, behind on rent because you prioritize her care." Tears burned behind Joanna's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Why are you showing me this? Because I made you a promise, and I keep my promises. He pulled out another document letterhead from a private oncology clinic that Joanna had only seen in magazines. Your mother has been transferred to Henderson Medical Center. Private room, full coverage. The best oncologist in the state is reviewing her case personally. Joanna stared at the paperwork, unable to process what she was seeing. I can't afford. You're not paying. I am. Matt's voice was firm but not unkind. Consider it payment for services rendered, or gratitude for saving my son, or simply what I should have done the moment I learned you were struggling. Why? The question came out broken, confused. Why would you do this? Matt's was quiet for a long moment, his hands resting on the desk, his rings catching the light. Because 3 years ago, my wife was diagnosed with the same cancer, he said finally, and I had the money, the resources, the connections to get her the best care available. But I was too focused on business, too distracted by territory disputes and profit margins. I waited too long to act. His jaw clenched. By the time I paid attention, it was too late. The cancer had spread. The best doctors in the world couldn't save her. He looked up at Joanna. She died 6 months later, and Andrea lost his mother because I was too busy being important. Joanna's throat tightened. Suddenly, the controlled man, the calculated violence, the careful power, all of it made horrible sense. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't be sorry. Just accept the help. Matz closed the folder. Your mother's appointment is tomorrow at 10 a.m. Ivan will drive you. You'll meet with Dr. Patel, and she'll explain the treatment plan. Joanna looked at the paperwork, at the opportunity she'd never thought possible, at the lifeline being offered by a man who trafficked in violence but understood loss. Thank you, she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Thank you, Matz countered, for not walking past my son, for calling me, for asking questions that saved lives. He extended his hand. We're even now. After tomorrow, you're free to return to your life. No obligations, no strings. Joanna looked at his outstretched hand, scarred knuckles, heavy rings, the hand that had probably killed people and definitely saved her mother, and shook it. One condition, she said. Matz raised an eyebrow. If Andrea ever needs someone to talk to, someone outside this world, someone who won't judge him for wanting something different. Joanna held his gaze. You let him call me. Matz studied her for a long moment, something like respect flickering in his dark eyes. Deal, he said. That night, lying in the safe house apartment, Joanna called the hospital and heard her mother's voice stronger than it had been in months, hopeful in a way Joanna had forgotten was possible. They say I'm going somewhere better tomorrow, her mother said. They say there are treatments, real treatments, not just pain management. I know, Mom. How did this happen? Who paid for this? Joanna looked out the window at the city lights, at the snow still falling, at the world that had tilted sideways in the space of 48 hours. Someone who understands what it means to lose people, she said quietly, and who doesn't want anyone else to feel that way. Henderson Medical Center smelled like possibility instead of despair. Joanna walked through corridors that didn't echo with institutional bleakness, past rooms with windows that actually opened, toward a consultation office where her mother sat talking to a doctor who looked at her like she was a person instead of a case number. Miss Sanders, Dr. Patel said, standing to shake Joanna's hand. Your mother and I were just discussing treatment options. The cancer is advanced, but it's not beyond intervention. With aggressive chemotherapy and targeted radiation, we're looking at significantly improved outcomes. Her mother, thin, pale, but with eyes that held more life than they had in months, reached for Joanna's hand. She says there's hope, Joe. Real hope. Joanna sat down because her legs suddenly couldn't hold her weight. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Treatment starts next week. We'll do 3 cycles of chemo, reassess, then determine if surgery is viable. Doctor. Patel pulled up scans on her computer. I won't lie to you, it's going to be difficult. But your mother is strong, and we caught it before metastasis to other organs. Caught it. As if someone had been looking. As if they'd had the luxury of preventive care and early detection, instead of emergency room visits when the pain became unbearable. After the consultation, Joanna walked her mother to her new room, private, quiet, with a view of the garden instead of a parking lot. A nurse brought tea in actual china cups. Another explained the meal options as if her mother were checking into a hotel instead of fighting for her life. How did you do this? Her mother asked when they were alone. Joanna thought about Andrea in the alley. about phone calls that changed everything, about men who dealt in violence but understood debt in ways that transcended money. "I helped someone," she said simply, "and they helped me back." Her mother studied her with the particular scrutiny of someone who'd raised a daughter alone and learned to read truth in silence. "This person, are they dangerous?" "Yes." "Are you safe?" "Yes." And Joanna realized she meant it. Whatever else Mats Hendricks was, he kept his promises. Her mother squeezed her hand. "Then I won't ask more questions. Sometimes survival means accepting help from unexpected places." Ivan drove Joanna to Carmine's that afternoon. The lunch shift was in full swing, the dining room filled with the usual clientele business lunches, quiet conversations, men in expensive suits conducting transactions over osso buco and risotto. Giuseppe met her at the staff entrance, his nervous energy dialed up to catastrophic levels. "Joanna, thank God. Mr. Hendricks wants to see you. Upstairs, right now." She climbed the narrow staircase again, knocked on the office door, entered when Mats called out. He sat at his desk reviewing documents, looking exactly like he had 2 nights ago except for the faint shadows under his eyes that suggested sleep remained elusive. Andrea sat in the chair beside him, his face still bruised but healing, the swelling reduced enough that both eyes were fully open. "Joanna." Andrea stood immediately, then winced at the movement. "Thank you. For everything. Dad told me you stayed with me. Anyone would have," Joanna said, the automatic response. "No," Andrea said firmly, sounding older than 14. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have kept walking." Mats gestured to an empty chair. "Sit. Please. We need to discuss something." Joanna sat, hyper-aware of both of them watching her with identical expressions of careful assessment. "Your mother's treatment is arranged," Mats began. "That obligation is fulfilled. Which means, as promised, you're free to return to your normal life." Joanna nodded slowly, waiting for the catch. "However," Mats continued, "I have a proposal. One you're absolutely free to decline without consequence." "I'm listening." "I own 3 restaurants in this city. Carmine's is the smallest, the most discreet. The other 2 are significantly more upscale places, where clientele expect excellence and pay accordingly." He slid a folder across the desk. "I need a manager for Bella Vista. My current one is retiring. The position comes with a salary that's triple what you make now. Benefits that include full medical coverage and flexible hours." Joanna opened the folder, saw numbers that made her head spin. "Why me?" "Because you're observant. Because you're smart. Because you understand discretion." Mats leaned back. "And because Andrea likes you, which means you're someone I can trust near my family." Andrea nodded enthusiastically. "The desserts at Bella Vista are amazing, and you wouldn't have to wash dishes." Despite everything, Joanna smiled. "That is a compelling argument." "There are no hidden obligations," Mats said carefully. "You work at the restaurant. You manage staff, handle operations, ensure quality. That's all. You're not part of my other business. You're not expected to see things, hear things, or know things. You're simply an excellent manager at an excellent restaurant." Joanna looked between father and son, saw genuine offer in one face and hopeful anticipation in the other. "What if I say no? Then Ivan drives you home, you return to Carmine's tomorrow, and nothing changes except your mother receives ongoing care." Mats's expression was sincere. "I don't make offers with penalties for refusal. That's not respect, that's coercion." Joanna thought about her studio apartment with the broken heater, about tips that never stretched far enough, about the manager at Carmine's who scheduled her for doubles without asking and cut her hours when she complained. She thought about her mother in a hospital room with windows that opened, about treatment that might actually work, about futures that felt possible instead of theoretical. "I have one question," she said. "Ask, will I still be myself? Or will I become someone who pretends not to see things that matter?" Mats considered this seriously. "You'll always be yourself. That's why I'm offering this. But yes, you'll learn when to look away, when to stay silent, when to understand that some knowledge is dangerous." He paused. "Is that something you can live with?" Joanna met his eyes. "I've been doing it for 2 years already." "Then you'll do it in better shoes with better pay." Mats extended his hand. "Do we have an agreement?" Joanna shook his hand. "When do I start?" 2 weeks. That gives you time to train your replacement at Carmine's and familiarize yourself with Bella Vista's operations." Mats released her hand. "Welcome aboard, Miss Sanders." Bella Vista occupied the top floor of a building that overlooked the river. All floor-to-ceiling windows and marble surfaces that caught the light in ways that made everything look like it belonged in a magazine. Joanna's first day started at 10 a.m. with a tour from the outgoing manager, a woman named Patricia, who'd spent 30 years in the restaurant industry, and looked at Joanna with the particular skepticism reserved for young-brained people who got jobs through connections instead of experience. "Mr. Hendricks doesn't usually hire internally from Carmine's," Patricia said, leading her through the kitchen, where 3 chefs worked in synchronized silence. "That's his private spot. This is his showcase." "I understand," Joanna said, choosing not to mention that she'd been hired for reasons that had nothing to do with her resume and everything to do with finding his son bleeding in an alley. Patricia showed her the reservation system, the wine cellar, the private dining rooms where men conducted business over 12-course tasting menus. She explained the clientele: CEOs, politicians, celebrities who valued discretion, and occasionally people from Matt's other world who appreciated good food served without judgment. "The rules are simple," Patricia said. "Excellent service, complete discretion. Never ask questions about what you overhear, never repeat what you see, never assume you understand the relationships between guests. Like Carmine's but with better lighting," Joanna offered. Patricia's expression cracked into something almost like a smile. "Exactly like Carmine's but with a Michelin star and customers who tip in thousands instead of 20s. By the end of the first week, Joanna had memorized the names of 60 regular customers, learned which tables had the best acoustics for private conversations, and discovered that managing a high-end restaurant meant being part diplomat, part psychologist, and part invisible ghost who anticipated needs before they were spoken. She was good at it, better than she'd expected. The staff respected her because she'd worked the floor herself, understood the physical toll of 12-hour shifts, and never asked anyone to do something she wouldn't do. The customers respected her because she remembered their preferences, seated them without fuss, and disappeared the moment she wasn't needed. Andrea visited on her second Friday, accompanied by Ivan and looking significantly healthier than the last time she'd seen him. The bruises had faded to yellow-green shadows, and he moved without wincing. "This place is incredible," he said, looking around the dining room with open admiration. "Way better than Carmine's." "Don't let your father hear you say that," Joanna said, smiling. "Carmine's has character. Carmine's has rats in the alley and a bathroom that floods every winter." Andrea grinned. "This has an actual view." Joanna seated him at a corner table, brought him the tiramisu he'd always ordered at Carmine's, and sat down for 5 minutes while the lunch rush settled. "How are you doing?" she asked. "Really doing?" Andrea's smile dimmed slightly. "Better. School's weird now, though. Everyone knows something happened, but nobody knows what. Dad had the story locked down tight, told everyone I was in a car accident. That bothers you?" "Yeah, I mean, I get why. But it's like having this secret that everyone can sense but nobody can talk about." He picked at the dessert. "Do you ever feel like that? Like you're living 2 lives and can't tell anyone?" Joanna thought about her mother's miraculous treatment, about surveillance footage and interrogations, about men who disappeared and were never mentioned again. "Every day," she said honestly. "Does it get easier?" "I don't know yet. Ask me in 6 months." Andrea laughed, then turned serious. "Thank you. For that night. Dad told me you could have kept walking, that most people would have. Your dad says that. You said that. But I don't think it's true." Joanna leaned forward. "I think most people would stop, would help. The world isn't as cruel as people in your father's business think it is. Maybe." Andrea didn't sound convinced. "Or maybe you're different than most people." Before Joanna could respond, Matt's appeared in the entrance, and the energy in the room shifted subtly. Conversations dropped in volume, postures straightened. Awareness rippled through the space like wind across water. He crossed to their table, kissed Andrea's head, and nodded to Joanna. "How's the first week?" "Exhausting and excellent," Joanna said. "Patricia says you're a natural." High praise from someone who doesn't give it easily. Matt's glanced around the dining room with the particular satisfaction of someone surveying a well-run operation. "I knew I made the right choice." "Dad wants me to work here this summer," Andrea said. "Busboy or something. Says I need to understand the business from the ground up." "Every business," Joanna corrected, meeting Matt's eyes. "Not just restaurants." "Every business," Matt's agreed. "He needs to understand how things work, how people work. Can't do that from private schools and protected environments. Andrea rolled his eyes with the particular exasperation of teenagers whose parents insist on teaching life lessons. But Joanna saw something else beneath it. Pride, maybe, or the desire to prove himself capable in his father's world. Well, if you're going to bus tables, you'll do it properly, Joanna said. I'll train you myself. See? Matt said to Andrea. Now you can't complain about nepotism. Joanna will work you harder than anyone. After they left, Joanna returned to the host stand and found an envelope tucked beside the reservation book. Inside was a card-heavy stock, expensive, with a simple message in Matt's precise handwriting. You gave my son back to me. This is just a restaurant. Thank you for understanding the difference. Joanna slipped the card into her pocket and returned to work, seating customers, managing staff, existing in the space between worlds where excellent service mattered more than the violence that sometimes funded it. She was learning the rules of this new life, and surprisingly, they didn't feel that different from the old ones. Survive, pay attention, be kind when you can, look away when you must. The only difference was the view. 3 months after finding Andrea in the alley, Joanna walked home from Bella Vista through streets that no longer felt threatening, not because the neighborhood had changed, but because she had. Ivan still insisted on driving her most nights, but occasionally when the weather was clear and she needed to think, she walked. The route took her past Carmine's, past the alley where everything had changed, past the corner where she used to catch the bus, with tips that barely covered fare. Her mother was in remission. Not cured, Dr. Patel was careful to emphasize that, but responding to treatment in ways that suggested years instead of months. She'd moved into a better apartment, one with heat that worked and windows that didn't leak, paid for by the salary Joanna earned managing a restaurant where discretion was worth more than gold. Andrea had started working at Bella Vista on weekends, bussing tables with surprising diligence and chatting with customers who had no idea they were being served by the son of one of the most dangerous men in the city. He was good at it, naturally charming, attentive without being intrusive, the kind of kid who would have succeeded anywhere but was learning to navigate his father's world with careful grace. Joanna's phone buzzed as she reached her building. A text from Matt's. Dinner tomorrow, 7 p.m. Bring your mother if she's feeling up to it. She smiled, typed back. She'd love that. Thank you. The relationship between them had settled into something unexpected, not quite friendship, not quite professional distance, but a mutual respect built on crisis and maintained through careful boundaries. Matt's never asked her to be part of his other business, and Joanna never asked questions about the things she sometimes overheard in private dining rooms. But Andrea had become something different. He texted her about school, about the customer who'd tried to order something that wasn't on the menu, about whether he should take the scholarship to boarding school or stay local. She'd become the person he talked to when he needed advice from someone who understood his world but wasn't entirely consumed by it. Inside her apartment, bigger now, furnished with pieces that weren't second-hand, Joanna made tea and sat by the window, watching the city lights reflect off the river. She thought about the night that had changed everything, about snow falling on a boy who couldn't get up, about a phone call made without hesitation, about choices that rippled forward in ways impossible to predict. Her mother was alive because of that night. Andrea had a father who'd been reminded that protection meant presence, not just power. And Joanna had discovered that survival sometimes meant accepting help from people who lived in moral gray spaces she'd always tried to avoid. A knock at her door pulled her from reflection. She checked the peephole, surprised to find Andrea standing in the hallway, with Ivan hovering protectively behind him. Andrea, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, he said quickly, stepping inside when she opened the door. I wanted to give you something. He pulled a small wrapped box from his coat pocket, handed it to her with the awkward earnestness of a teenager who'd put thought into something meaningful. Joanna unwrapped it carefully, found a silver bracelet inside, simple, elegant, with a single charm. A small serpent coiled in a circle. Dad's mark, Andrea explained. But not the tattoo version. This is different. It means your family. Not organization family, actual family. People who matter. People who get protected. Joanna's throat tightened. Andrea, I can't accept. You already did, he interrupted, his voice firm despite the emotion behind it. You accepted when you stopped in that alley, when you called Dad, when you stayed. He met her eyes. You saved my life, Joanna. This just makes it official. She pulled him into a hug, felt him hug back with the fierce gratitude of someone who understood how close he'd come to a different ending. Thank you, she whispered, for being someone worth saving. After Andrea left, Joanna fastened the bracelet around her wrist and looked at her reflection in the window. The woman staring back looked different than the exhausted waitress who'd stumbled over a boy in the snow 3 months ago. Stronger, maybe. More certain. Still kind, but with clearer boundaries about when kindness required action and when it required silence. She'd entered Mats Hendrix's world by accident and stayed by choice, understanding that some debts couldn't be repaid with money, some gratitude couldn't be expressed with words, and some families were built not through blood but through the moments when you chose not to look away. Her phone buzzed again. Her mother. "Feeling good tonight. Looking forward to dinner tomorrow. Love you," Joanna typed back. "Love you too, Mom." She finished her tea, turned off the lights, and went to bed in an apartment that felt like home instead of a waiting room for the next catastrophe. The night that should have been ordinary had changed everything. And somehow, impossibly, it had changed things for the better. Not because violence had been avoided, it hadn't. Not because justice was clean, it never was in Mats's world. But because one person had stopped when others would have kept walking, had called when silence would have been safer, had stayed when leaving would have been easier. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. Joanna fell asleep with the bracelet on her wrist, and the knowledge that she'd found her place in a world she'd never expected to enter. Not as a participant in the darkness, but as someone who reminded dangerous men that light still existed. And in that space, she'd discovered something powerful. Compassion doesn't require innocence, and protection doesn't always come from expected places. It comes from people who understand what it means to lose everything, and refuse to let others experience that same loss. That night, Joanna Sanders slept deeply for the first time in years, knowing her mother was safe, her future was stable, and somewhere across the city, a father and son were learning to hold each other tighter, all because she'd refused to keep walking. Thanks for sticking with this story until the very end. You're the reason these stories feel alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to read your thoughts and connect with you in the comments.